Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Welcome to the program, everyone. Of course, I don't have to say what is on everyone's mind right now. Things are looking quite dire. Sarah and I are holed up here on the mountain. We have food, fuel, and thankfully power, internet, and cell service. I can only hope that you guys are waiting this out as comfortably as we are. Well, I know that you came here to escape news of the pandemic, so I'll leave all that talk right here. I have a spooktacular set of stories plucked for your listening pleasure. And to kick it off, we begin with a ghostly tale out of the state of Iowa. This is JP's submission.
Hi, Derek. This is JP from Central Iowa. And I have a story about something that happened to me when I met my husband. When I moved in with him, he lived in an old farmhouse that was owned by an elderly couple for years and years. They actually built the place. The thing is the guy, he kind of ends up haunting the outside, and she haunts the inside of the house. And he basically likes the farm. They never really got along. So he prefers to be out in the farm where he loved to be. But I had an encounter with this woman, and so did his ex-wife and his two kids. Apparently, his kids kept waking up in the middle of the night, and they kept seeing this woman in their bedroom door. And they both went separately to their mom and said, "Hey, I see this older woman in my bedroom door at night, and she just stares at me." And I chalk this up as kids being kids, but the fact is they were actually scared. And after the oldest daughter came forward, the youngest daughter came forward and said the same thing like a week later. And she didn't even know that her sister told her mom about the encounter. So she kind of wrote it off. She just said, "Oh, we'll just let it be. It's probably just the woman that lived here before." And they had problems with things coming up missing, misplaced every once in a while. So when they left and I came into the picture, I didn't really have any problem. But I started noticing things, just simple things like the laundry room, things would be misplaced. And I actually got to thinking, well, it was me. So I made sure and I would put certain things in certain spots all the time, and I could never find them. They would be up in a cupboard, top shelf, way stuck in the back, or behind a washing machine, or something really weird. I started thinking, well, maybe there is a little bit of truth to all this. And so I got to the point to where I was living there for about 2 years dealing with all this stuff, and my husband farms. So he would be farming, and I would be in the basement with my two dogs. And one of the dogs looked up at the ceiling, and I heard, like, footsteps walking from one end of the building to the other, and then back again. The dog looked up and looked at me, and then just kind of looked at the stairs, and he came back, and he laid back down. It's almost like he knew, like, there's something here, but I'm here. And it's a healer dog, so if he was really going to be alarmed, he would have taken right after it. He was a very aggressive dog. About a month later after that experience, me and my husband were sitting there watching TV, and I went up to go to the bathroom. Well, the hallway was dark. We didn't have the light on. and our bedroom was right next to the bathroom, and both lights were off. And as I was walking to the bathroom so I could go use the bathroom, I seen this figure in the corner of my eye, and I turned my head real sharp, and I seen this old woman glaring at me. And I turned around, and I just ran back. I couldn't. It still scares me to even think about it to this day. It was so scary. I've had ghost encounters before when I was little, but I've never had a full-featured apparition looking right back at me with this glare. She just didn't want me there or something. I don't know. Anyway, as time went on, I was noticing more things happening, and I was getting cold chills in the middle of summer. And we didn't even have the air on at one point because our air was broke. And I felt like there was a presence there that didn't want me there. And the really weird thing is that she never was like this towards my husband. For some reason, she didn't have any effect on him. But her husband had an effect on him. Whenever we were outside doing chores and something would go wrong, he would proceed to cuss the spirit, of the guy out. And one day he just went off and he said, da-da-da-da-da, you stupid old man, and just kept going off. And then all of a sudden, his brand new tires on his livestock trailer blew out on one side. And then he just immediately shut up. And we looked at each other like, wow, that just happened. And there was nothing wrong with the tires. We only took him out on the road took the trailer out on the road maybe a handful of times, if that. And that was just weird how that happened. And then a month ago, the same thing happened. He was going to take the manure out of the building, and he was using the skid loader, and he couldn't get into a certain spot. And he said, you so-and-so old man, you didn't build these buildings right. And then all of a sudden, his tires blew out on his skid loader, right on cue. So, yeah, so we ended up moving out of that house. And I told him, I said, I don't want to take anything from this place that was original, anything that was in the house or out in the buildings, because I've heard that spirits can move with if they're attached to something. So I've been reluctant to share my story because I'm afraid that the spirit might come back and find me. I know that's just kind of a crazy thought, but you never know. Thank you for letting me share, and love your podcast. I've been listening to it for about a year now, and it's awesome. Thank you so much. You're awesome, Derek, and have a good night. Bye.
Thank you, JP. It sounds like the former residents were hell-bent on keeping that farm. The list of activity was quite extensive. I love the mention of cursing the old man for his building skills. I, for one, can relate. When I bought this place and began to demo a few things, I found dozens of rusty nails used where one or two would have sufficed. I, too, did plenty of cursing. The man that built this place had a nail for every square inch. A nightmare situation when you're trying to remove large pieces of plywood from your walls and floors. It wasn't until years later that I was talking to my neighbor and good friend John. That's when he informed me that the same man built most of the cabins in the area, including mine and John's. But here's the part that really gets me. The man was a millionaire, but he would still visit old construction sites and pick up bent and used nails, take them home and hammer them straight. Then he proceeded to hammer them into my house. A lot of them. Now I guess that would explain why the room the studio is in now was filled with bucket after bucket of bent, rusty nails. Thank you again, JP, for sharing your story with us. Now our next story is like several that we've heard before. And yes, it's just as wild as the others. The following was submitted anonymously from the state of Illinois.
Hi, Derek. This story comes from Illinois. But I just heard the pterodactyl story you just played, and it kind of made me remember a story from when I was younger. It was really weird, so I never really shared it with anybody, but I also, too, saw a pterodactyl. Me and my father, we were outside. It was just a warm afternoon during the summer. We're just outside watching the sunset. We had a pool, just hanging outside, and we both just so happened to look outside at the same time, or look up at the sky at the same time, and we see a red pterodactyl, I guess is what we have to put it into, and the guy who called before me, he didn't say what color. I wonder if it was red, but ours was red, and it flew pretty close down for us to realize that that's honestly what we think it looked like. I never really told anybody the story because, how do you tell someone with a straight face that you saw a dinosaur? That is my story, and I'm sticking to it. I've never really told anybody the story because I don't want anybody to think I'm weird. But, yeah, I really like your podcast. I listen to it all the time at work when I'm doing my stories and things of that sort. So, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, caller. Here we go again with these pterodactyls or pterodons. We've heard at least a half a dozen submissions seemingly describing these creatures, and one of those was from my own father. But despite all these encounters, we're still no closer to solving this timeless mystery. So thank you again, caller, for sharing your experience with us. Well, today is the first day of spring, which typically reminds me of baseball. So why not share a ghostly tale regarding America's pastime? This is Nick's submission from the state of Florida.
Yeah, my name is Nick. I am from Polk County, Florida, and the story that I have for you is 2012 through 2014, I used to work for a minor league baseball team here that's local to us. I worked at the clubhouse. I was one of the main clubhouse assistants, actually the only one that was there, besides my boss. The grounds for the baseball team used to be an old World War II air base, the whole complex. The complex is quite large. It spans multiple buildings, multiple hangars, old barracks that have been converted into locker rooms and such. And what's interesting is that some of the old hangars where they store the tractors and stuff that they use to mow the fields still actually have the original paint from when they were first painted during the 1940s. But the incidents that I've actually experienced multiple incidents in this location before, but I wanted to go with one that was very shocking to me, one that kind of really shook me a little bit and really made me a true believer in the paranormal, especially in ghosts. What happened was that it was late at night. It was probably about, I'd have to say about 10 o'clock. And this was 10 o'clock p.m. And everybody was gone for the evening. And the way this building is set up is there's two doors. There's the main front door and the back door. And both doors have big, giant, the push bars in the front. So if you open them, they make a very loud clicking noise. So you know if somebody walks in. And the doors are very heavy, so they slam, so you know when somebody leaves, or if the door has been at least opened and then shut. So anyways, I was talking to my, at the time, current boss. I was talking to him, and he has a dog. He has his personal pet dog that he brings, who's also a service dog. It's a German Shepherd, and the way his door works is that he has a half door, so the doors that can open from the top and keep the bottom shut. I was standing there leaning on the door talking to him with my back facing the main clubhouse, meaning facing the locker room. And his dog jumped up and jumped off the couch and ran up to the door and jumped up on the door and was just staring into the locker room. Now, with it being 10 o'clock, well, the reason we were so late, we were still there is we were waiting for some laundry to finish up. But the rest of the locker room was shut off. Like the lights were shut off. The athletic training room next door, the lights were off. Everything. It was dark. But there was still enough light that you could vaguely see. So there was nobody there. It was just him and I and the dog. That's it. Nobody else. There's no way for anybody else to come in. There's no windows, nothing. It is just a big, giant square. And so I turn around and see what the dog is looking at. And there was a black silhouette in the doorway. And the door has a big, giant window, a big window. And from waist high or waist up, I could see a black silhouette in the doorway. And now this silhouette was a perfect outcut of a person. I mean, you could tell it was a person. Typically, when you see like any sort of spiritual figures or anything along those lines, it can be almost distorted or fuzzy. But it was clear as day. I could tell it was a person. But because of the fact that it wasn't an actual person, there's no way. It had to be some sort of paranormal entity of some kind, because that the finer details of the facial structure and the body structure you couldn't see. The only thing that you could physically see was just the outline of the body. You could see the arms, the main torso, and the head. Now, I presume that it was a male because I didn't see any form of long hair. I didn't look at this silhouette no longer than maybe 5 seconds before I turned around. And when I turned back around, when I first looked at it, I could see what it was. And I could tell exactly I could tell it was a person. I didn't think anything of it. Until I turned back around, I realized that there was somebody there. There was something there. And when I turned back around to look, it was gone. It wasn't even there anymore. But the dog just stood there and was just staring the whole time, just staring at this spot of where this thing was. And you know that they say that animals, particularly dogs and such, cats, can see things that we cannot normally see. And the fact that the dog got up, gave a bit of a small little growl, and was just staring at that spot is what really sent the chills down my spine once I realized what exactly I saw when I turned around the first time. That is one of my main experiences at this location. I have other stories that I can call back in and share those about other times that I was actually touched by spirits, things that were in there that actually physically touched me. So get back to you on that. Thank you for your time, and I really, really enjoy watching the podcast. So good thing.
I appreciate it, Nick. Double confirmation. You gotta love that. Not only did Nick see this entity for at least 5 seconds, but the dog also seemed to alert to something. So we have to ask ourselves a question. Which seems more likely? That both the dog and Nick were drawn to the same area coincidentally, or that someone, or perhaps something, caught both of their attention? Something from another time, another place, possibly even another plane. Thank you again, Nick, for sharing that encounter. Before I move on to the next entry of the evening, I'd like to remind everyone that the Kickstarter campaign for the upcoming documentary David Flora of Blurry Photos and I are producing, Shadows in the Desert, High Strangeness, and the Borrego Triangle. Well, you guys really seemed excited for this project. We are very close to reaching our minimum goal, which means the film will be made. But we really need that full budget to get this thing to its full potential. So keep those pledges coming. Unlock those stretch goals, and let's get this thing going. A huge thank you to everyone that has already pledged. Now our next story comes to us from the state of Maine. This is Janelle's call.
Hi, Derek. My name is Janelle. I'm calling from Maine. And this is just a kind of a UFO creepy story that happened to me when I was probably about 15 or 16. I lived in central Maine at the time, kind of a rural area. Certainly an area that I found out later on as I got older and got interested in UFOs and cryptids and such was actually an area where in the past they had seen UFO sightings, things that were actually written up that you can find on the internet today in areas near Madison, Maine. But this story was it was just the strangest thing. I had a good friend of mine. She lived across the street, and being 15, 16-year-old girls, we were allowed to be home alone for a bit in the evenings, and quite often on a Friday night, my mom worked late, and my dad would often go down and pick her up from work, and they'd have a little evening date, and I'd have a little bit of time to just hang with my friends. So my friend had come over, we had hung out, and then she was getting ready to go home. So as always happened, I would just walk across the street with her and kind of stand at the end of her driveway, and we would chat a little bit more before we finally gave up and went in. And it was probably, again, you're talking this was the 90s, so probably 93, 94. And we were standing outside talking, and it was in the spring because I remember it being warm. And all of a sudden, from my backyard, I can see a light coming up over the trees. And it was just a solid kind of a yellow white light, nothing fancy, nothing flashing, nothing crazy about it. And at first I thought, well, perhaps it's just a helicopter for some reason. Maybe it's, we just didn't know. We kind of watched it, and it came up over the trees, and it was flying what looked like fairly low. I can't say that I saw an outline or a shape, but it was just this light. And I listened. Again, living in rural Maine, there's not a lot of traffic. There's not a lot of, it's crickets at that time of the evening, and especially that time of the year. And we stood there and we kind of watched it. We were chatting, and as we continued to watch it more, we realized that it was moving towards us very kind of slow, but silent at the same time. It came up over us, and we kind of just stood there and watched it. And I remember it looked like it was low, because it kind of gave off a little bit of glow, not enough to light up the area around us, but it was still enough to make it lighter around us than just the regular night was. It wasn't a moon. It wasn't and it was moving, like we could see. And I'll never forget it, went behind. It just kind of flew over, kind of along the tree line, and went behind. And my friend was kind of like, oh, that's weird. Then all of a sudden it kind of reappeared over the tree line in the back of her house. And then all of a sudden there was a flash of light, and it zipped up and was gone. And I remember the both of us just kind of looking at each other, kind of giving each other that look of, oh my God, did that really just happen? And the fact that we saw it literally zipped up and was just gone. It just flew so quick. I thought, could it have been a plane? Could it have been, a plane putting on afterburners? But it wasn't moving that fast to begin with. When it was moving over the tree line, it was very slow and kind of just meandering along. And then all of a sudden there was that flash of light when it just zipped away. And the flash of light, like I said, was enough that it actually lit up the area around the back of the trees where it was kind of over. And I remember at that point, she and I kind of looked at each other, and it was like, okay, this is the end of the evening. We are definitely we're going home. I'm going to my house, you go in yours. And, we saw strange lights again, nothing quite that dramatic, but certainly saw things that we thought were strange. And like I said, as I got older and did a little research, I realized that there were actually stories where very reputable people in the area had seen strange lights, strange crafts. You're talking policemen, teachers, people who would not be prone to probably being overly big on exaggeration of things like that. So it was kind of interesting that I had my experience, and then later in life learned that there was actually other experiences people have had prior to. So I just wanted to thank you for your podcast. It's wonderful. I listen to it every night on the ride home from work. It's really interesting. I love to hear all the stories that people have, and I hope that you have a great evening.
Thank you, Janelle. Anytime someone mentions UFOs in the state of Maine, I immediately think of the Allagash incident, an incident we covered several seasons back. 4 men on a canoe/camping trip encounter something that they can't explain. To get a little insight on their experience, the following clip features part of an interview with 2 of those 4 witnesses, Charlie Foltz and Jem Wiener. This interview comes courtesy of the Portland Press Herald.
I was hoping we could start with, if you could, taking us back to your canoe trip in 1976.
And after working our way across, taking a good 20 minutes to get there, we began fishing. And we'd only been there just maybe about 10 minutes at the most.
Yeah, if that.
And the other guy who was sitting at the back of the canoe said, "What the hell's that?" And we all turned and looked in that direction, and I saw this light at the tops of the trees.
I mean, this thing was big, man. It was as big as a 2-story house. It had to be at least 70, 80 feet in diameter.
Yeah.
Were you fearful?
No,
Curious.
not at first. We were
Curious.
very curious at first because it made no noise at all, so there was no threatening hums or whines or anything like that.
And it was moving slowly toward us.
It was going very slowly, but it had this. It wasn't a solid. It didn't look like a solid object. It was like it had a fuzzy edge to it. I thought, well, let's try signaling it. And Chuck had a flashlight because we were using the flashlight to attract fish.
Sure.
And he immediately ticked off a SOS.
Just out of curiosity.
As soon as he did that, I mean, immediately after he did that, this beam of light came out of the bottom of this thing, and it came right for our canoe. I mean, we lit up like a Roman candle out in the middle of a black lake. So we started paddling. And, I mean, we were really going. And I remember looking back at one point to see where this thing was and thinking that it was way behind us. And instead of being way behind us, it was right up there. And then the next thing we remembered, all of a sudden our canoe hit the beach. And we got out of the canoe and we stood there, and it was right in front of us in the water. I remember standing there looking at this thing, thinking that if I had a stone or a fair-sized rock, like maybe an egg-sized rock, I could hit it. That's how close it was. So what's that, about 30, 40 yards maybe?
Of course, what happens after this is the real meat and potatoes of this incident, but I'll let you do your own research on that. And I should point out, according to a USA Today poll from back in July of 2019, Maine ranks 5th for sightings of UFOs per capita in the US. So thanks again, Janelle, for sharing your encounter. I assume yours is one of those. If you are like Janelle and you saw or experienced something you can't quite explain, call the Monsters Among Us hotline at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. Or you can visit the website at monstersamonguspodcast.com and click on the Report Your Sightings tab for more submission options. Up next, we venture into the world of cryptids. This is Rachel's submission from Pennsylvania.
Hello, my name is Rachel. I'm from Pennsylvania, and this happened when I was around 7 years old. Since we live out in the boonies, there's big thick forests everywhere, and the house that I lived in had giant forests behind it. I remember one time I was riding my quad out in the back when I was around 7 years old, riding through the woods, and I remember looking up, and in the distance there was this thing that was moving through the trees, and I thought for a minute it was a black bear, because it looked like a black bear. It was obviously black, and it just moved like a bear. It was just real slow. And then I looked at it a little bit longer, and it just started moving strangely, like its limbs were too long, and it looked like anatomically not correct for a bear. It looked more like a man hunching over on all four legs, but very large and very dark. So I didn't exactly know what to do, because I'm sitting on my quad. I'm like, do I drive off and, make noise and have it come near me, or do I just sit and wait till it goes away? But it eventually, it lumbered off, and it had those real big, long back legs. I did some research around the area, and there is a creature, sort of like a Bigfoot creature, that people have documented around sort of like the area of the United States that I live in. It's called the Jacob's Monster. And it just sort of looks like a bear with mange, kind of. It just looks like that, but there's just something off-putting about it that I can't really explain and that I saw with my own eyes. Thank you again for your time. I love your show.
Thank you, Rachel. The creature Rachel is referring to stems from a few trail cam photos that were taken back in 2007 in northwest Pennsylvania. The creature featured in the photos is fascinating. It's a series of 3 game camera shots, all in night vision. In the first, a pair of black bear cubs playing. But 28 short minutes later, something odd appears in the next 2 frames. The creature photographed is dark and hairy. Its arms and legs are long and kind of spindly. The creature is down on all fours, but in a way that reminds me of a chimpanzee. Because of the angle, you can't see the head on the creature. As far as I know, this photo has never been officially debunked. Now, I've linked to these photos in tonight's show notes, so go take a look and tell me, what do you think that is? Thanks again, Rachel, for sharing your experience. Our next story is one I simply cannot explain. Please welcome Leo from Indiana to the show.
Hi, my name is Leo. I'm calling from Indiana. My event took place in about 1985 or 6, I'm not sure. I was probably about 12. I was sitting in my living room with my mom, and it was winter, and it was a clear night, and I noticed the curtains on one of our windows, thick curtains, the sun block out curtains, were kind of waving in the wind a bit. And I looked over there, and I'm like, Mom, look at those curtains. And she's like, oh, the window must be open. But I didn't think so since it was winter. And I'm like, wouldn't that be cold? She's like, I don't know, there's probably a breeze or something. And they were really moving like almost as if someone was just poking at them from the other side, like just poking outwards. So, she was kind of ignoring me, watching TV, and I walked over and I pulled the curtains back to look, and the window was closed. But on the window, I saw a black triangle. It really looked as if someone had just cut a black triangle out of cardboard and just was holding it up to the window. And we had a security light outside, so it was also silhouetted a bit, but it was directly against the window, and I just did not know what was happening. I just, ran from the window and told my mom. I ran over. I'm like, Mom, there was a black triangle on the window. It was probably about 10 inches on each side, and she just kind of ignored me still, and she's like, oh, it was probably just a cat's ear. And I still just think that's hilarious that she thought that it could have been a cat's ear, and I have no idea what it is, or if it's supernatural, or I don't know. It's just the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. And I've always been a fan of the supernatural and wanting to find things and going into every haunted place and looking into everything that, people tell you to stay away from. I love it. I've never encountered anything that I couldn't explain except that one thing that happened to me when I was very young. All right, that's it. Thanks a lot for doing the podcast. I love it a lot, and I'll keep listening. Goodbye.
Thank you, Leo. A cat's ear. That's such a mom answer. I can almost hear my mom saying something quite similar. Now, the mention of a black triangle jars a memory loose in the back of my brain. Back in 1996, a man named Dr. Jonathan Reed claimed to have come across a black obelisk hovering in the forest. Before he knew it, an alien creature attacked, killing Dr. Reed's dog, before Reed could then bash the frail, leathery creature's head in. The black triangle, measuring roughly 3 foot by 4 foot, and hovering a couple feet off the forest floor, was seemingly the alien's craft. Now you're probably thinking, this can't get any more bonkers. But get this, he had a video camera rolling. Here is a quick section of interview with Dr. Reed. I believe this clip is from Coast to Coast, but I found it on YouTube.
So, Doctor, when did you hear that scream?
Well, after a few hours had gone by, and I had called Gary back, and he had calmed me down from crawling practically around the ceiling. We both went out to look again, and I figured, we went out and looked. We did the same thing. I opened the freezer so that I could know that I was not imagining this. And the same thing happened. And when the freezer was opened, this thing let out a scream like I have never heard before. It literally, the force of the sound made you feel like something was pushing against your chest.
The air around it as it screams actually bubbles and moves.
It felt like the air was moving.
God.
And at that time, it was just, open and closed. And later on, I felt like I had to try to document this.
Of course.
So I took my camera and I took the recorder and I turned it on and I again opened the freezer, and that's when I recorded this sound.
Would you play the sound for us once again, please?
Yes, I will. Hold on.
Okay. Here it comes. Oh my God, that's awful. Oh God, that's awful. How did you stay dry?
I have, of course, a link to the video in this interview in tonight's show notes. It's important to note that Dr. Reed is actually a fictitious name, and the video was actually created by a man named John Bradley Rudder. And according to many ufologists, the entire thing is a fabrication. But it is one hell of a story. So thank you again, Leo, for reminding me of this gem. And that brings us to the doorstep of our final call of the evening. And I have a feeling you guys are going to love this one. The following call was sent in from Canada. This is Kelsey's experience.
Yes, hello. My name is Kelsey. My story, I guess, is about something called the glimmerman. It's something that I kind of, never heard about before my story, and it's something that after I started searching for it, and it brought me to your podcast, and in hopes that I could find some evidence of somebody else who has experienced what I've experienced. So yeah, I'm from Canada. I live in a southeastern Ontario. My story happened, it would have been early July of 2014. Fiance and I were spending a day in a large metropolitan area. It was kind of like enjoying a nice day out. We had hit a bunch of restaurants, had a couple of drinks throughout the day, and then decided to kind of head back to the hotel fairly early and crash early, and so we could head out early the next day. So the night went on as normal. We went to bed. I woke up probably about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. This isn't a natural or a normal for me. I do wake up fairly early and was just like any other day, just kind of laying around trying to get back to sleep. I do know it was early enough when the encounter happened that there was some light from dawn coming in from the windows. We did have the curtains drawn in the hotel room that we were staying at, but there was some light coming in. And as I'm laying there as normal, everything's quiet, I'm just trying to get back to sleep. I noticed that I can hear his voice, and that it's my fiance's voice, and he's kind of talking in his sleep, which is not abnormal for him. Yeah, he says some silly things in his sleep, so I decided that, I'm awake. I'm going to, as odd as it sounds, I'm going to try to see if I can, figure out what he's saying. And it's kind of like a little game or like a joke that we do. If he says something really hilarious in his sleep, I'll try to remember what he says and tell him the next day. So I had rolled over and was trying to make out what my fiance was saying as he was sleep talking. And as I'm looking at him lying in bed next to me, I notice on the wall there's probably about 3 feet of space between where my fiance was lying on his side of the bed and the space between the wall. It was about 3 feet. And I noticed something as I'm staring at his mouth. I noticed something moving, very, very small, moving on the wall behind him, or I guess beside him. So I'm noticing this thing moving, and it's kind of swaying back and forth, and it's really tiny, and it's almost like a shimmering thing kind of swaying like a pendulum back and forth on the wall. So I'm trying to adjust my eyes, and obviously at this point I'm thinking this has to be a trick of my mind. So I'm trying to focus and see if I can figure out what this is. And I noticed that it almost looks like a hand moving back and forth. And it's like, as I'm noticing this thing, I can tell that the hand is attached to a part of an arm, and I can see where the arm bends at the elbow, and I can then see that the arm is attached to a body, and the body has a head, and the head has hair. And the person, I could even tell, it looked to me like he was wearing, I say he because it's what I assume, but the person was wearing glasses as well, actually. So the figure looked like he was My best description that I had at the time was almost looked like he was made of water. I could see like I said, dawn, the sun shining in very, very slightly, and I could see on the curves of, the arm and on his elbow, I could see where the light was hitting the edges of his body, and this figure was made of what I could say was that this figure was made of water. It's the only thing that I could come up with. And he was leaned over my fiance as my fiance is, whispering. He's like making bizarre noises in his sleep. And this figure is leaned over him, waving his right hand. The figure is waving its own right hand back and forth in front of my fiance's face, as if to say, like, can you see me? Are you reacting to this? It's almost like when someone has, they're blindfolded and you wave your hand in front of their face to see if they can see you. That was what the figure was doing in front of my husband. And naturally I froze. I've never been so scared in my life. And I'm watching this thing wave in his face, and then probably about 5 seconds goes by, and the figure stood up and slowly turned around and walked away about 5 steps into the darkness at the edge of the bed and around the corner, and just disappeared. Naturally, I was scared out of my mind. I think I leapt onto my fiance and nearly gave him a heart attack. He said that he thought he was having some sort of seizure with my reaction because I was so terrified. I leapt on top of him, and I'm not afraid to admit I did start to cry. I was so afraid. But yeah, so after this happened, I explained everything to him, and of course, like anybody with a logical mind, figured my eyes must be playing tricks on me, with the trick of the light on the wall. And so I decided that it made the most sense to try to, not change any part of the atmosphere in the room and the lighting, and try to lay back down and replicate what I had seen. Like many people who know when you're having visual hallucinations, it is, at least for myself, I know it is quite easy to see something similar if I'm trying to see it again. I can honestly say that I lived there for the remainder of the night/early morning until about 9 a.m. Or 8 or 9 a.m. just trying to sort out what I had seen, make it happen again. Yeah, just trying to basically prove myself wrong that I hadn't just seen a spirit or a ghost or a figure or whatever you might want to call them. So then after that, I started obviously a search on the internet to try to figure out if anybody else had witnessed what I had witnessed, because I'd never heard anybody witnessing a figure that looked like it was made of water. I guess my searches weren't doing well for me because I never found anything else, and I guess just a part of me chalked it up to hallucinating. Then I guess it's been maybe 4 years have gone by. I'm since then obviously I'm an avid Redditor, all over the Reddit paranormal subs, and I was reading a story of a person who was talking about the glimmerman and they had seen in a part of the U.S. outside, in the woods, a very similar account to mine, and that sort of justified what I had seen, and it gave me something to narrow down what I was searching for. And someone had said, search the predator in cloaking mode, and as soon as I did that and I saw the photo, I've never seen the movie Predator. As soon as I saw the photo of the predator in cloaking mode, like the feeling that I had in my stomach, it was sheer excitement mixed with fear, mixed with disbelief that what I had seen was validated now because others had been seeing it as well. And it's such I don't want to say common, but it's such a prevalent thing in the paranormal community. But yeah, so that's my story with Glimmerman. Anyways, like everybody else says, I absolutely love your podcast. Keep up the great work, and I can't wait to hear some more stories. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kelsey. It's been a while since we've heard from our old pal, the Glimmerman. You might recall a pair of calls shared back in season 5 or 6 from then husband and wife Justin and Harley. They independently witnessed something quite similar while at a rest stop in Idaho. I even did a deep dive with those witnesses for Patreon. Speaking of which, a brand new episode dropped on Patreon earlier this week. So if you guys are bored, which I'm sure most of you are, consider hitting up Patreon till this whole thing blows over. Anyway, for the longest time, this entity didn't seem to have a name. Many would simply refer to it as the Predator, a nod to the film series Kelsey mentioned in her call. But at some point, a few years back, people began referring to it as the Glimmerman. Now I believe friends of the show and hosts of Expanded Perspectives, Cam and Kyle, actually came up with the Glimmerman moniker. But despite all this info, we are no closer to solving this mystery. Is it something that occurs naturally? Is it an alien? Or perhaps something from our military? Frankly, I have no idea. But I do know one thing for certain. The fact that this one was seen in a hotel room only deepens the mystery further. Thank you again, Kelsey, for sharing that experience. And that's going to do it for this episode. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Addie Lloyd and Sarah Carter Hayes. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. And you hear those creepy tunes? That's co.ag. Now before we sign off, I just want to say real quickly, take the warning seriously. Stay home when you can. Wash your hands. Be safe. I'll catch you guys next week. Have a good night. I'm not so much in the reading mood, so tonight's secret story is going to come in the form of a call. The following was submitted anonymously from the state of Colorado.
Hi, first-time caller, long-time listener. I'm gonna not say my name, but I wanted to call in with a Bigfoot story. This took place few years ago, I think it would have been 2015 or 2016. This happened in Rocky Mountain National Park in the summer. So I live in Boulder, and I've been going up to park to climb during the summers for the last, 10 years or so, which I mentioned just to say that, it's an area that I'm really familiar with, and I'm really used to, hiking in the forest at night, and it doesn't freak me out. I'm really comfortable with that. But this actually took place during the daytime. Actually, it was kind of around dusk. So it was kind of an unusual day for me that I started hiking out so early, because I would normally climb until it got dark and then hike out in the dark by headlamp. But this particular day, I wore myself out early, started hiking down before the sun set, and I was kind of I remember I was actually kind of sad to be leaving so early that day. So the sighting happened actually pretty near the parking lot, the Bear Lake parking lot. I was probably maybe a mile or so away from the parking lot, in a section of the trail that thousands of people hike on every day, which made it extra confusing to me. But so what happened was I pulled off of the trail, and I was by myself, which I did a lot. I really used to go and climb by myself. So I pulled off at a particular spot on the trail where there was kind of this nice rock outcropping with a decent view, and I stopped to smoke a cigarette. I'd been listening to music on earbuds the whole time I'd been hiking down, but when I stopped, I pulled them out, and while I was just sitting there smoking, I heard this really loud crashing sound from the trees kind of below me, maybe 100 or 200 feet away from me, and that was really strange to me because that wasn't something I'd ever experienced there before. They sounded it was really loud, and they sounded like big, tree limbs being broken, bigger than something I would be able to break off of a tree. So I looked in that direction out of curiosity. I mean, I was assuming it was a bear, because I definitely didn't believe in Bigfoot at the time. So I was looking into the trees, and it's a super brief sighting, but a gap between a couple trees, I saw what, as far as I could say, was just a Bigfoot, hairy humanoid figure, furry, running through the trees, swinging their arms like a like a person would run. And it kind of blew my mind because, like I said, I didn't believe in Bigfoot, but I saw what I saw. So I immediately was like, holy shit. And I go running down this hill to try to see this thing. But it was like kind of starting to get dark in the trees, and I just started to get really freaked out. Just really like felt like I shouldn't have been there. Because kind of either way, like if it was a bear that I just totally misidentified, then it wouldn't be good to just kind of sneak up on it. And I kind of started to feel the same way about if it was a Bigfoot, that like it might not want me to be chasing after it. So I left, didn't get a better sight than what I did, but yeah, kind of changed my life. So yeah, that's it. Keep up the good work, man.
Thank you, caller. It's funny that Colorado has quickly become a hotspot for these type of sightings. In fact, the highly acclaimed History Channel series, Monster Quest, did an entire episode on a Bigfoot-like creature they called the Snow Beast. The episode is called Snow Beast Slaughter, Season 3, Episode 6, and believe it or not, it's actually streaming on Amazon Prime right now, so go check it out. Thank you again, caller, for submitting that story, and thank you for sticking around to the end of the show. Have a good night.